Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our program, The Wonder of Bird Migration. My name is Helen Liu, and I'm the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Cary Library. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like today's event to you. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please submit them to the Q&A. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Bill retired from Mass Audubon in 2016, but remains very active teaching workshops. He is the past president of the Friends of Parker River National Wildlife Refuge and current board member. Bill enjoys sharing his photographs and travel experiences through his PowerPoint presentations. Please join me in welcoming Bill Gette.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Helen. It's always a pleasure to work with you. The wonder of bird migration, and I'll get started here. I'm going to give you examples of three what I considered incredible migrations, and then we'll go in and talk about, well, how did they do it? Okay, well, I present to you four different species of birds. The upper left-hand corner is a bird called a black pole warbler. Black pole for the top of the head, being black, top of the head. Okay, then and it's only the size of a chickadee, if you're familiar with a chickadee. Then the bottom left is the Northern Wheatear. This is a bird of northern Canada, northern Alaska, places of that nature. A size of maybe a tufted titmouse. Okay, so we're talking about small birds. The upper right-hand corner is Arctic tern. This is one of the extraordinary, a lot of people know about the migration feats of Arctic terns. We'll talk about that. And then in the bottom right-hand corner is bar-tailed godwit. This is the female bar-tailed godwit. And I took that photograph in Nome, Alaska. The photographs in here are mine. But let's just talk about black pole warbler. Now, this is a warbler, again, the size of a chickadee. It has a very long migration. Its annual migration is 12,000 miles. Now, a bird the size of a chickadee. It makes many stops in transit, although it does have a very significant, as long as 72-hour nonstop flight over the Caribbean. So now, black pole warblers do nest in places like Newfoundland and Labrador, but they also nest way over in Nome, Alaska. And I've photographed them, been many times to Nome. And just think of yourself as being, well, you're a baby bird. You're just broken out of the egg. And so your parents are going to be shoving caterpillars in your mouth for, 8 to 9, 10 days. And then you leave the nest, and then they'll help feed you for a little while. But you're only weeks old. And you probably hatched sometime end of June, early July. And by September, your internal calendar says, hey, it's time to migrate. So that bird that's now only several months old will start migrating by itself. The parents aren't leading it, okay? And so it's going to migrate in a southeasterly direction across the better part of Alaska, across the Yukon Territory, Northwest Territories, across northern parts of, say, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, coming into Ontario, and ends up in New England or in the Canadian Maritimes. Well, that's 3,000 miles. It's already traveled 3,000 miles. Well, I'll talk more about this later. After it builds up its fat reserves and the conditions are correct, it then flies 2,000 miles nonstop to the north coast of South America. And it's not done yet. And then it flies across Amazonia, and the majority of them end up in the country of Bolivia. They're there for only several months, and that calendar goes off again and says, time to go back to your nesting site. And they fly up through Middle America, and they end up back in Alaska and back in Nome. And that's 5,500 miles. Now, to me, that's pretty amazing. That's one example. Northern Wheatear, again, the size of a tufted titmouse. The population that nests, say, for Hudson Bay in Canada towards the east, they migrate to West Africa. I'll show you a chart in a moment. The ones that are sort of Hudson Bay to the west up into northern Alaska, they're going to migrate to the west. And their round trip is 18,000 miles. So just imagine this. Okay, so if you're a northern wheatear that I've seen up in northern Manitoba, things like that. It's probably they are going to be migrating to the east, and they migrate across Greenland, across the ocean south of Iceland. They end up in Europe, and then they migrate down the west coast of Africa, and then that's where they overwinter. That's extraordinary. That's 4,660 miles one way. The other ones that I would photograph in Nome, Alaska, they're going to go the other direction. Okay, so these are two different subspecies of northern wheatears. And so those are going across Siberia, across Mongolia, okay, going down through the Middle East, as we call it, and they end up in places like where I've seen them in Kenya and Tanzania. That one trip is 9,320 miles. Now they're making numerous stops in transit to feed and everything, but that's huge. And then we have Arctic tern. Now they put a geolocator on a tern, on this Arctic tern, at the nesting colony in the east coast of Great Britain. And then with that geolocator, when it returned from its migration back to the nesting site the next year, they recovered that geolocator and they found out that during that 1 year, or actually a little bit half a year, had traveled 59,650 miles. A lot of travel. But I think the one that is truly amazing is this one. This is a bar-tailed godwit. This is the female. And there was one that they named B6, okay? And she made a nonstop flight of 8,425 miles, flying 11 days non-aloft, never stopping. Now, try it sometime. Try to flap your arms for 5 minutes. You can't do it, okay? But here is a bird that's flapping its wings, flying for 11 days. And so there is the mother. Of course, if you take a look at the Pacific Ocean, the land masses in the Pacific Ocean is 1/10 of 1% of the area. That's the male, by the way, that you see. So here's a bird that's flying nonstop from Alaska all the way to Tanzania. I'm sorry, Tasmania. So the question becomes, well, how do they do these things? Okay, well, we're going to first have some definitions that I think are important that we'll be dealing with. And this is, first of all, what is a migration? A true migration, okay? It's a seasonal movement by an organism from one place to another. Butterflies migrate, fishes, gnu's in Africa. Lots of animals are migrating. The key element for it to be really called a migration is that it's regular. For example, if you told me that you needed to see a northern gannet, I know with absolute certainty that if I were to take you to the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge near Newburyport, or to Cape Ann, or to Cape Cod, that I could show you a northern gannet migrating through there in November, and I could show you that migrating back in April. It's irregular and it's predictable. And the driving force, of course, is seeking a reliable food supply. There are certain animals, especially birds, that if they don't migrate, they die. It's just as simple as that. Think of a fly-catching bird, eats insects. Well, in January around my place in Newburyport, there are not very many insects, so they absolutely have to move, okay? And by moving from one place to another, they can take advantage of seasonal food supplies. Think of ducks in Canada. Well, when the autumn comes or in the winter comes, those ponds freeze up. So the ducks can't get to the fishes that they're up. They have to go to other places, like to the ocean or big rivers, where they can then be feeding on it. There are certain birds that in Africa migrate from West Africa to East Africa. They fly out of the forested areas to the savanna areas where there are lots of insects. So another element is, hey, by migrating north or in South America, going south, you can take advantage of the longer daytimes. And I'll talk more about that later. Well, right here. So if you're at the equator, okay, and that's why it's called the equator, the days and nights are the same length every day of the year. So if you want to go to the equator and you want absolute predictability, you can have a 12-hour day and a 12-hour night. If you were to migrate to my home here at Newburyport in June 15th, the days are 15 hours and 20 minutes. Okay. If you go to Anchorage, Alaska, the daylight on June 15th is 19 hours and 19 minutes. And if you go to Utqiagvik or Barrow, which is north of the Arctic Circle, for about 2.5 months, the sun actually never goes below the horizon. So you can see by going from the equator to the Arctic Circle, you have doubled or practically doubled the amount of feeding time that you have. Okay. The other thing is just availability. Notice the shape. The shape of the North American continent is like a funnel. If you start down at Panama, where Panama is, the Isthmus of Panama is anywhere from 37 to 110 miles across. But if you measure from St. John, Newfoundland, all the way up to, say, Barrow, Alaska, Nome, Alaska, that's almost 4,000 miles. So by moving north, you can go to where there's much more nesting habitat, where you can be more dispersed to try to avoid predators. So not only you get more space, you get more light. Okay. So some birds in the New World tropics, where there's limited space, they can't breed all the time because there's not enough suitable nesting sites. Okay? But migration, and a point I really want to get across, there is no such thing in my mind as spring migration and fall migration. There are spring migrations and there are fall migrations. Some of these birds are moving relatively short distances. Some are going extraordinarily long distances. Some species, all of them migrate. Only some of them migrate. So anyway, but there's some short distances. Well, short distances is birds, say, coming out of New England and going to Georgia. Now, I'd hate to have to walk that way, but it's considered a short range migrant. But birds that are flying from the Arctic Circle to southern Argentina, that's a long range migrant. Okay. Another thing is, again, in some species, all of them go. Like if you were a eastern kingbird, it's a fly-catching bird, they have to migrate or they'll starve. But there are other ones like northern mockingbirds. Some of them migrate and some of them don't. So a good example of a short-range migrant is this one. This is gray catbird. It gets its name because its call is sort of like a meow, okay? And say, okay, this is one southern Canada, eastern two-thirds of the United States, and they go going down the Texas Gulf Coast, or some of them go into the northern part of Central America. So that's a long way, but in terms of categorizing different migration, that's considered a short range. Then there's this white-rumped sandpiper. Their breeding grounds are near the Arctic Circle, and they go to this southern part of South America. I've seen them in southernmost Argentina. Long range. And then another way to look at migration, we have altitudinal migrants. This is a dark-eyed junco. Okay? And this is a bird that nests on places like the top of Mount Washington. Well, if in January, you don't want to be at the top of Mount Washington. So a lot of birds move up and down the mountains with the seasons, and this is one of them. In the tropics, the resplendent quetzal, which is a real, bird watchers just really want to see that bird. They move up and down the mountains during the year based on the ripening of the wild avocados. Okay, so they'll be earlier in the year, the avocados are ripening lower in the mountains. And as the season goes on, the trees come into fruit at different times. Okay. Obligate, I talked about this briefly before. These are ones that the complete obligate. They have to migrate. If you're an eastern kingbird here in January, you die. So they have to migrate. Okay. Then we have partial migrants. This is one I mentioned slightly before, the northern mockingbird. This is a northern mockingbird in a plant called winterberry. And this is a plant that has this fruit. So in this case, what's happening is typically the males overwinter here and the females migrate further south. And you can migrate at different times of the day. These are diurnal migrants. So swallows, for example, and hawks. Well, one of the real advantage of going during the daytime is you can feed. If you're a flycatcher feeding on flying insects, well, you could just fly along, and it's like sort of stopping in at a Wendy's or a McDonald's along the highway as they're going along. So they can feed as they're going, and they can also see obstacles. They can avoid wires and trees and things of that nature. So it's a good thing to do. But there are benefits of going at nighttime. Okay. There are very few predatory birds flying at nighttime. Owls do, but they typically are not chasing after small songbirds like this. On a summer day or in the fall when it's really, really windy, at nighttime, the wind almost always drops way off. So you get much more stable winds. And the temperatures, the risk of flying during the daytime when the temperatures are of overheating. Well, you don't have that issue during the nighttime. Now, a disadvantage could be that you might fly into something that you don't see. But most of our small birds are migrating during the nighttime. Then you have crepuscular ones. This has to do with twilight, late afternoon, early in the morning. So grackles, red-winged blackbirds are typically flying in big flocks in the early morning and in the late afternoon. So where I'm in Newburyport, in the late summer, early fall, I start seeing large groups of red-winged blackbirds and grackles flying together during the evening. So phenology, that's just basically the study of the timing of things, when things happen. So over thousands upon thousands of generations, the species have developed and passed through their genetic code to their young ones. When is the most optimal time to migrate? When are the weather conditions better? When are the food supplies better? All these type of things. So when is it safest to migrate? Okay. And as I mentioned briefly before, the differences between male and female priorities. And some birds, there are two very closely related birds, long-billed dowitcher and short-billed dowitchers, that are very similar, feed in exactly the same places, but the main portion of their migration time is a month off, separated. So here's just a chart that I wanted to show you. Going across the top of those photographs is the palm warbler, yellow rump warbler, and mourning warbler. And so just to show you how different some of these migrations can be. Notice in orange, the palm warbler. Well, 38 or 7% of them are all going through between the 15th of April and the 21st of April. So that's a relatively early migrant. You go over to the yellow ones. Those are the yellow ones. Notice that the peaks of their migration is more the week of the 29th of April to the 5th of May, and then the 6th of May through the 12th. But go way over to the right-hand side, the mourning warbler. If you really want to see one, if that's all you want to see, there's really no point in going to even look for them until the very last week of May. 71% of them migrate through our area in that 1 week. So different birds are coming at different times. You can see the chart here very clearly. Okay. Now, migration strategy by gender. Males and females of the same species often have different migration strategies. The males and females are driven by different priorities. Here is the migration. These are common yellow throats. The male on the left-hand side, tiny little warbler, smaller than a chickadee. Okay, there's the male and there's the female. Well, the strategy of the male is to come to this area, find a really great niche in the habitat, a nesting site, because he knows the females are really smart. Okay, the females want a place where they can build a nest, where they build nesting materials to be used to build a nest, and where there's food around for them to feed on. So he comes before the females, starts advertising, defending his territory against other males, and advertising for a female. Well, when he's up here in Massachusetts, just arriving in Massachusetts, she's still down somewhere in Maryland or Virginia. Okay. Her priority, she has to arrive here healthy, because very soon after she arrives, she'll find a mate. Okay. She'll start laying eggs. So maybe even before building a nest, So with a very short time after arriving, she has to be prepared to start laying eggs. And it always what amazes me, these little females are laying 3 or 4 eggs over a very short period of time, like 5 or 6 days. Just compare the mass of those eggs to her body mass. It's just incredible. Okay. And so here's a chart. Now this is I started a bird banding station on the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge. And so I have access to all the banding records. So we banded 5,400 of this one species of bird. But notice the chart. Notice how the males are coming a week ahead of the females, which proves the point. The males have got to get up here, set up their territory, advertise for females, and the females have got to come up here when it's healthiest for them. Okay. I talked about the Wheatears, again, so different migration strategies. We already talked about this. And then they come down to the key, well, how do they do it? Okay, we agree these are amazing migrations. But how do they do it? What's possible? How can they possibly do this? We'll talk about fuel for migration, use of environmental factors. Okay, they have to be good weather forecasters. Let's get to that. Benefits of being in a flock. Being in a flock sort of sounds counterintuitive. Wouldn't be, if you're in a flock, wouldn't that attract predators? Well, why would you want to be in a flock? And then other migration adaptations, and then we'll talk about ability to navigate. Okay. Well, just before, if you're going on a long trip, typically you fuel up your car, so you have fuel to get there. Well, the fat is really important. Birds need to build up fat reserves if they're going to be long-range migrants. So they eat a lot, and so early spring migrants, birds that are moving into our area, they need to have some fat reserves also. Okay, because they've arrived now, they've completed their migration, they've landed in Massachusetts, everything is fine, but then it starts to snow or sleety rain or something. So they need not only those fat reserves to help, that's fuel for flying, but they also need some fat reserves because the conditions may become extremely cold or snowy or rainy and they can't feed. So the reserves are. Now, hyperphagia is the gluttonous eating. Okay, I think this is a really good example. So non-migratory birds don't build up a lot of fat reserves. They have to have some because there may be some days where they can't be feeding because of the weather. The short-range migrants, like that catbird, typically they gain between 20 to 30% of the lean body weight prior to migrating. That's quite a bit. But those long-range migrants, like that blackpoll warbler that's going to migrate nonstop from New England to the north coast of South America, they double their body weight with fat. Okay, so, well, weight gain, okay, they can gain as much as 10% of their mass per day. This is an incredible selective advantage. Just think if you had to double your body weight in order to have enough fat as fuel to get you from New England to South Coast of South America. Let's just say you could only put on 1% of your body weight a day. Well, to get to the 100%, it would take you 100 days. I'm not very good at math, but okay. And so during so many of those days, as you're getting heavier and heavier, it's harder to escape. You can't fly as fast, and it's harder to escape predators. But a selective advantage, if you could put on that fat very, very quickly, again, that's a really important selective advantage. And they do this. Here's an example. These are the two blackpoll warblers we talked about, again, size of a chickadee. And the male is in the upper left-hand corner of my slide, and the female is in the right. Okay. We at the bird banding station that I operated, we capture birds in nets. Nets were about 12 meters long and about 6 feet high. And so we walked out to one of the nets to check for. We have to check the nets all the time. And we went out there, and here were two blackpoll warblers right next to each other. So we went and we put the band on it. So every band, it has a unique number. So we have number ends in 60 and 61. We banded it. This happened to be on October 5th of 2003, and we weighed them. One was 20.3 grams and the other was 12.3. So the one ending in 60 was getting to almost its ready body weight to migrate because its typical mass is about 11 grams. Okay. So pretty much. Now, here on the body where we can see, so when we capture a bird, okay, we inspect it, okay, we put a band on it, and then we can't band it unless we know what species it is and what gender it is. And then we then take a look at other conditions. Is it molting feathers? Does it have fat? And so in this image, this is a bird. The head, by the way, is to the left and the tail is to the right. The right side of my screen, you barely see their feet. Well, that yellow that you're seeing is fat. The red you see is muscle, and then towards the right-hand side, you see more fat again. That furculum, think of a turkey where the wishbone is. It's concave, okay? But when they start putting the fat reserve, this becomes convex. It's bulging. And so this is a bird that's built up its fat reserves in such a way that this bird is practically ready, given that the weather conditions are good, for it to migrate. They also have fat where you can't see it around their internal organs and things of that nature. So they think about fuel tanks. They're filling up their fuel tanks. Now, Gill is sort of the authority, hey, we'll have this book, Ornithology, which is amazing. And he came up with this statistic, which I think is pretty good. It says metabolizing fat as fuel, a blackpoll warbler can achieve the equivalent of 720,000 miles per gallon of gasoline based on that fat. So if you take the fact that there are 10 grams of fat going from, say, 11 grams to 21 or 22 grams, and you figure that the distance from New England to the north coast of South America is 2,000 miles, you can do the math, and that's what he says it is. Okay. So use of environmental factors. This is absolutely critical. Okay. A bird's ability to utilize weather-related factors is critical to their survival during migration, especially birds that are going over long distance of the ocean or over deserts like that. Yeah. So birds have the ability to sense changes in barometric pressure, for instance. Well, if you're in an airplane, you're flying in from wherever you're from, Dallas, Fort Worth, into Boston, the captain comes on and she says, well, we're going to be landing in Logan Airport in 20 minutes. We're starting our final descent. What do you start feeling in your ears? You start feeling air pressure differences, okay? So apparently birds can detect the changes in their inner ear just like humans can, okay? And changes in barometric pressure, not on an airplane, but on the ground, changes in barometric pressure forecast short-term weather conditions. A favorable wind is amazing. Think of a warbler that can fly at, say, 20 mile, 15, between 15 and 20 miles an hour in still wind. Okay. If it can fly 15, 20 miles an hour in still wind, well, it can go 15 miles or 20 miles in an hour. Okay. But if it has a headwind of 15 miles an hour and it's flapping relative at 15 miles an hour, relative to the ground, it's not going anywhere. Yeah. So it's really important that they understand, they can predict what the wind conditions are going before they start flying long distances. They're hoping for and waiting for following winds. Because if you can fly in still wind at 15 miles an hour and the tailwind is at 20, relative to the ground, you're going 35 miles an hour. By having a tailwind, you can save fat reserves. It's not as hard to fly. So it's really important. So, example, let's just say that the point of departure is Cary Library, beautiful place. Okay. Okay, that's where the bird is. Let's say it has all of its fat reserves and everything. And if the bird, and let's say the bird wants to go south to the bottom of my slide. Okay. Well, if that bird can detect rising barometric pressure, that forecasts the onset of a high pressure system. one is coming into the area. So that bird knows instinctively that, hey, if the barometric pressure is increasing, then I am going to have favorable tailwinds. If you want to go south, that's exactly when you want to go. If you want to go north, you don't want to go then because you're going to be facing and flying right into the headwinds. Yeah. Okay. Now, consequently, a low pressure system, Carry library in yellow there. Okay. If the bird detects that the barometric pressures are falling, it predicts that they're going to be counterclockwise winds. So certainly a bird that's flying to the south is not going to want to depart out over the ocean in the face of unfavorable winds. So birds are incredibly smart. Okay. The next thing is updrafts and thermals. If you're familiar with the Appalachian Mountain, they start up in Newfoundland and they come through New England and they go in a southwesterly direction down to Georgia. Well, think of the image on the left-hand side as being looking at the Appalachian Mountains with them going before and back here. Winds are typically from the west. So as the winds are coming from the west, they hit the Appalachian Mountains, they go up. Okay. Well, birds that are trying to migrate from behind my screen towards me, okay, they can just fly right along the edge of those mountains in a southerly direction, using those updrafts to gain lift and to fly. Okay, on the right-hand side, these are called thermals. So think of farm fields, city blocks, things like that. When they heat up, the air starts to rise. So what birds will do is they can see the disruptions in the air, and so they'll go to the base of the thermal and they'll drift up and up and up. Now, I've watched in Panama, they have a city park, one of the largest city parks in the world. And from there, you can overlook the city of Panama, and in the distance beyond the Panama City is the Pacific Ocean. And I watched birds fly from as far as I could see to the south. So pick it out, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 miles, to as far as I could see to the north. And actually, Panama is east-west, but as far as I could go to the right. And I've watched them fly that whole distance, and they never flap their wings. What are they doing? Well, there are a lot of farm fields, sugarcane, things of that nature, and there's the city environment. What they're doing is they see these thermals, and they rise up and up and up, and then they look for the next one, and they fly to the next one. They go up and up and up, and then they fly to the next one. So they save so much energy. This is referred to as a kettle. Okay, so if I go back here on the right-hand side, you see that rising air? Okay, that's what I'm seeing right here. I'm in the middle of that, and I'm looking straight up. And what these are turkey vultures and broad-winged hawks, and they're going in a circle, 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 up, up, up. And when the air starts to cool a little bit, they look for the next thermal, and they just lock their wings and they just fly to the partway up to the next thermal, and up and up and up they go, and they amazing saving in terms of energy. Over the ocean swells with the big waves, okay? And if there's wind that's coming across the ocean, the wind hits those waves and goes up. And so birds like albatrosses and shearwaters use that updrafts that are off the wave to get up in that updraft and then skim right along the top of the wave. Okay. We talked briefly about flocking behavior. I think this is really important. I think for a lot of folks, it's counterintuitive. Why would you want to be in a flock? Because the predators can see you so well. This is a flock of sanderlings and dunlins. These are shorebirds. Well, I used to play tennis, okay? And if had a partner and I wanted to be, I would just throw one ball at a time, okay? And my partner's brain, of course, would be doing all the mathematics, okay? And the speed of the ball and the height of the bounce and how much wind there is and all these type of things. And that brain, after doing all that mathematics, it says, well, put your hand here and you grab the ball. Well, if you want to be silly, you can throw all three balls at the same time. Well, you have to be an extraordinary to be able to do all that mathematics on three different objects flying at exactly the same time. Well, that's one of the ideas. This in a mass like this with birds that are moving on, it's hard for a predator to focus in on one object to attack because that predatory bird needs to be able to say, well, the bird is here, it's flying at so many miles per hour, so if I'm here, in order for me to intercept that bird, I have to fly ahead of it. Okay. Well, the other thing that's really important here in a flock like this, a predatory bird, if it flies into a flock of birds like that, may be going after one of the birds, but collide with another one. Now, a predatory bird like a falcon or sharp-shinned hawk or Cooper's hawk that injures its wings may not be able to fly. A predatory bird that's dependent on catching birds in flight is going to starve to death. Okay, so it has to be very careful. Going through a flock, really dangerous. Okay, and then being in a flock. Notice these are semi-palmated plovers. Notice they're all facing in different directions. Okay, they're all being in a flock like that. They can all take turns. They're all looking for potential. Some of them can sleep at a time. They can sleep part-time, but they're all looking in all different directions for possible predators. If you're a single semi-palmated plover, every once in a while you have to look, oh, in front of me, now I have to look behind me. Are there any predators that are coming up? Okay. Another thing beneficial flocks, you can all mob and try to chase away the red-tailed hawk, in this case, the Cooper's hawk, in order to get them away. Okay. Here's the benefits of this joint surveillance again. And you'll see this especially in the springtime when a pair, in these geese, the male and female participate in raising the young together. In ducks, after copulations the males take off, they're done. The female does all the work. In geese and swans, they both male and female contribute. And when they have young ones, if you see them walking, one of the adults will be in front, all the little ones in the back, and then another one at the adult at the back. Okay. Just like taking kindergartners to the library or something, kindergartners. Okay. But here in the case of, it's a huge benefit. The benefits of joint surveillance. Here is one Canada goose that was watching me, and the other one, there were actually more geese in the group, but he was watching, or she was watching me, and because I was under surveillance, the other ones could feed without any worries. Don't worry, okay? Laverne is watching for us, no problem, okay? So instead of each goose having to bring its head up every once in a while to see a possible predator, they can share the burden, and there's huge benefits to that. Ability to find food, flocks help other birds find food. Happens to be a flock around a fishing boat. Okay. There are a bunch of great egrets and one snowy egret. The snowy egret is the little one in the right-hand side of the slide. What they were doing, they were ability and hunting together, mixed flocks. Sometimes I see herons, egrets, ducks, cormorants. They all converge on a small, this is called a salt pan, P-A-N-N-E. It's a little pool in a salt marsh. And what they'll do is they'll get at one side of the pond pool and they'll swim together or walk together and drive all the fishes up into shallower water where they're much easier to catch. Okay. These are cattle egrets. They like to feed us in a group in farm fields because they're after caterpillars and crickets and grasshoppers and things of that nature. And as they walk together as a group, one of the egrets will scare up some insects that the others can catch. The other thing, benefits of flocking behavior. This is an aerofoil. This is the shape of an airplane wing. This is the shape of a bird wing. Okay, what happens here is that as the wing is encountering the air, some of the air just flows directly underneath the wing, unimpeded, but some of the air is forced up over the top of that airfoil and then down the other side. Well, according to Bernoulli's principle, And he says that if you have a liquid or a fluid, a liquid or a gas, okay, and you speed it up, the pressure within that decreases. That's how birds fly. Because as that air goes over the top of the wing, it speeds up because it's being crammed between the upper surface of the wing and the air that's above it. So that's what gives the bird lift. But the real benefit of flying in a flock is notice the updrafts. As that air is coming off the wing, it curls up. So the birds that are flying at the outer part of the wings get the benefit of the updrafts of the bird in front of it. Okay. You can see this, especially best of all when geese are flying at a V formation or cormorants flying in a V formation. You'll see that the birds up in front have to be flapping the wings all the time. But if you look at the birds at the back end of the V, they have to stop flapping every once in a while in order to not get ahead of where that updraft is. So if you're a young bird that doesn't have the muscle mass of the birds that are 6 or 7 or 8 years old, the place that you migrate is that way at the end of the V formation to take benefit of the ones that are going in front of you. So really important. So they put monitors on some of the geese or swans and things of that nature, and they can see that those birds that are at the back end of the formation versus the ones at the very front, their heart rates are 11 to 14% slower than the ones in the front. The ones up in front are really working really hard. And then if you watch a group of snow geese or Canada geese, you'll every once in a while hear honk, honk, honk. Well, Mildred, who is up in the front, who is a real veteran of migration, well, she's getting tired because she's the one who's been working the hardest. You'll see them change position. One of the birds that the experienced birds, a couple back, will move into her position and she can move back so it's not as difficult. Of course, shared information. As I say, these animals are really smart, okay? And they share information. Certainly the adult birds are sharing information with the young ones as to hey, where am I supposed to fly? Now we're talking about ducks and geese and swans and cranes, not little songbirds, but they're sharing information with their young ones, okay? Other things, some adaptations that these birds go through, um, since excess weight makes flying harder, then a lot of these birds, especially the ones that are going very long distances, well, if you're not going to use your sex organs for a long time, they shrink up. If you're not going to be stopping to feed anywhere, the stomach and your intestines shrink up in order to make yourself lighter. Okay? Every every portion of an ounce is critical to survival. The other thing is the shape of the wings. Two examples here. There's that black-polled warbler I keep coming back to because it's such a great example of a long-range migrant. And then in the same genus, very closely related to it, is a pine warbler. Notice the wing projection. The wing projection on the black-polled warbler gives it additional lift with less drag, okay? Which is really important. If you're going a really long distance, you need the lift. And by reducing the amount of drag, that's the force that holds you back. You can go longer distances on the same amount of fuel. The pine warbler is a much shorter range migrant. And so it's only going from the New England area down to, say, the southeastern part of the United States. So black-polled warblers going to South America, 6,500 miles. Hey, the little pine warbler, 1,500 miles. That's a long way for us, but you can see how that wing morphology makes a big difference. Okay. So changes in feeding behavior. This is really important too. This is a tree swallow. If I'm very familiar with the Parker River National Wildlife, I've been coming here for decades. Okay. But in late August, early September, if you come up to the Parker River National Wildlife, that's near Newburyport, the river, Parker River National Wildlife Refuge is actually in the city of Newburyport, Newbury, Rowley, and Ipswich. Okay, it's a barrier island. And if you go in the late August, early September, you can see huge flocks of tree swallows that are massing there. Sometimes you can see estimated to be 40 or 50,000 of them in the evening time. Okay. But what they do is Why are they coming? Because of bayberries and fruit like that. So these are insectivores that during migration at time they then bulk up, build up their fat reserves by eating especially bayberries. Okay. And then changes in feeding behavior. This is a Wilson's warbler. It nests up in northern New England, particularly the western part of New England. This is one that typically see you on the nesting. Very seldom do you see it more than 8 or 10 feet off the ground. Okay, they're really low in the shrub vegetation, but during in migration and when they're in the fall in Middle and South America, you'll very often see them up in the tree canopies. So they're changing their feeding behavior. Now, ability to navigate. Okay, this is a gray catbird again. And no, this is records from the bird banding station, and I started it in 1998. And I first found this bird in May 28th. Okay, and that's his band number. And then we caught it again in September. So we bought it, we captured it at the beginning of the, well, sort of the middle of the breeding season, and we captured it again in the fall just before it migrated. Okay. Then we caught it again in the May of the following year. Okay. And then we captured it again in May of 2000. And then again in May of 2001. And then in the fall of 2001. And the last time we encountered it was in May of 2002. So here's a bird that's migrating probably at least to southeastern United States, but it's finding its way back to a small plot of land where we had the bird banding station and of these numbers of years. So their ability to find their way home is just amazing. Well, birds can navigate using landmarks. A lot of birds migrate along the ocean, okay? And they can just follow the coastline. A lot of birds migrate right down the Connecticut River Valley or down along the Mississippi, using these coastlines and rivers and mountains as clues. Okay. Well, oriented using the sun. I need to navigate. Okay, well, I have a sense of where I am, but now I need to know that I'm going in the correct direction. So many birds utilize the sun for orientation. Okay, but it's absolutely critical that in order to use the sun as a compass, you need to know what time of day it is. Okay. So, for example, if it's morning and the sun is on your right-hand side, then you can be quite assured that you're headed in a northerly direction. So, if it's morning and the sun is on your right-hand side, you're headed in a northerly direction. Okay. If it's afternoon and your sun is on your right-hand side, you are heading south. So birds don't have to know it's 9:15 or 8:45, but they clearly have to know that it's morning and not afternoon in order to properly orient using the sun as a compass. Okay. Stars, these birds that are migrating at night, use the constellations to orient themselves during navigation. And you say, well, how do you know that? Well, there are experiments that have been done, okay, sorry, done, that put birds in cages. Now, birds that are migratory, when at certain times of year, they get what's called migration restlessness. They get very nervous and they bounce around the cages and they just got to know. Their internal calendar says, no, it's time to migrate. Let's go in cages. So when these birds are in that migration restlessness, they'll put them in cages that the birds can see the roof of the planetarium. And they put constellations up on the ceiling of the planetarium. And I'm going to go just back here. Okay, they put the birds in a cage that looks like this. Notice on the bottom, it's an Emlyn funnel named for the man and woman who invented it. And at the bottom, that's an ink pad. Notice the flaring and then the screen on top so the birds can see the roof of the planetarium. And on the side is paper, like blotting paper. So what they do is they show the bird a group of the constellations, and this bird that wants to migrate is on the bottom of the funnel, and then it starts to try to fly in the direction that the constellations are saying it's going to. So it takes the ink that's on the bottom of the M1 funnel and deposits it on the side in the direction it wants to go. And then the people of planetarium change the night sky a little bit. And guess what? The bird then starts trying to go in that direction, and it makes footprints instead of being on the opposite side, as we're seeing, on the left-hand side. So the birds are using these constellations. I have a question. How many of you can do that? Okay. The other thing is they use the magnetic field. I don't think many of us can do that. But if you're on the south magnetic pole, basically the magnetic field comes up through your feet, through your body, down to your head. And if you're on the north magnetic pole, it comes down through your head, through your body, through your feet. And the birds can detect the inclination of the magnetic field so they know where they are relative to where they want to go. Okay? So pretty amazing, at least to me. Magnetic fields are very weak, but they're present throughout the world and they're present day and night. So make good. And the couple theories is how these birds can do it. There are some molecules, light-sensitive molecules in the retina of the eye that's thought to be part of it, or that there's iron-rich substance in the base of the bill that they can detect that magnetic field. Or some birds migrate using smell. Okay, birds have a very, very strong sense of smell, and especially seabirds can smell the nesting colonies from long distances away, and that's helpful in another way that some birds use to navigate. And you know, human eyes are really pathetic. We don't see very well. And hearing is really bad, and all those things compared to a lot of these birds. So a lot of birds are using infrasound. This is very low frequency sound. So birds that are, for example, in the Indian subcontinent can hear, as they migrate, they can hear the sound of the wind, for example, that are going through the Himalaya mountains. All these different, if you've never been to a place like Bhutan, you got to go. Okay. These mountain passes, and each pass, because it's different shape, makes different sounds. So they can use the sounds as navigation. Coming to the close here pretty soon, in terms of migration models, there's learned behavior. These are sandhill cranes. Okay. And they breed throughout the western part of the United States. They migrate up in the prairie provinces of Canada, like Alberta, Saskatchewan, places like that. So in this case is the adults are teaching their young one how to navigate. Okay. So if at the time that the male and female pair, they get this, their calendar says it's time to migrate. And they start honking and talking to each other like that. And the young one is sort of wondering what's going on here. And then when the adults to take off on their migration, the young one follows them. And it's at that point that the young bird then is imprinted as to where home is, where I'm supposed to come back to. So if the young one follows their adults on a migratory route, it learns that route. But it doesn't need the adult ones to take it back because imprinted in its genetic code is where am I supposed to go back to? So that's it. And then there are genetic models, and I'm going to end a conversation here. Okay, these migration patterns and timing migration, the circadian rhythms. There's springtime migrations and fall time. Good. And what happens in young birds, they don't, now I'm talking about songbirds, so all the warblers and vireos and sparrows and things of that nature. Okay, those have a genetic blueprint or a route map, if you wish, in their genetic code that has been handed down for tens of thousands of years. That describes to that bird, that young bird who's never migrated before, how I'm supposed to go, how far am I supposed to go in what direction. And that internal route map is what they use. So in the case of cranes and geese and cormorants, they will follow their adults in usually quite well-formed flocks. In the case of most of our songbirds, all the warblers and sparrows and things, they don't go in a fixed group like that, most of them. They are going on their own. Now, they may be in a mixed flock. So this is that genetic code that, again, that has been passed down for tens of thousands of years. Every once in a while, there are deviations in it, and if the deviation is too bad, that genetic code is going to send that young bird to the wrong place. And sometimes, especially where I am up in Newburyport, we will, in the late fall, we'll get some birds that should have migrated from, say, Oklahoma, New Mexico, south through Mexico. Well, every once in a while, we'll find them coming here. Now, these are lots of times are flycatchers. Well, a flycatcher that's coming to New England in late fall is not going to survive. So that defective genetic code that it received, okay, will pass out of the genetic library because the bird is not going to survive. Well, anyway, I hope that this talk has given you a good sense of what to me is extraordinary the feats. And just one of the, not a bird, but a monarch butterfly. You know, think of how tiny the brain of a monarch butterfly is, okay? But yet, the monarch butterflies that leave New England, they fly to Mexico. But in order to monarch butterflies to get back to New England, there are 3 generations. They leave Mexico, they go maybe to Arkansas, maybe to Tennessee, and then they arrive. So the monarch butterfly that's migrating from New England to Mexico is carrying genetic information and will pass on genetic information that's not going to be used for 3 more generations because the butterflies that are moving north back to New England don't have to go to know how to get to Mexico because they're not going to Mexico. It's only going to be the next generation. Well, I just hope that you have a sense of the wonderment that I do about these incredible migration feats that are going on. So if anybody says you eat like a bird, well, you can say, well, not some of them, you know, they double their body weight. Or if somebody ever calls you a bird brain, you should say thank you very much because these animals are truly amazing. Well, with that, Helen, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take those.
Thank you, Bill. So we have a question from Lee, actually a couple of questions. How did the 3-month-old bird who was flying alone know where to go? I think you just talked a little bit about that, so if
Yes,
you could
yes.
share a little
Well,
bit more.
it's the genetic code that's been passed down through thousands of generations it provides a blueprint for them to say you're supposed to fly in an easterly east southeast direction for so much time. Okay, and that's how it does because they are not flying with adult birds. And why I know that to be true? Well, at a bird banding station on the Park River National Wildlife Refuge, when you get to about September and in October, more than 85% of the birds that are captured there are birds that were fledged that year. So all the adults have already left. And so the vast majority of 85+% of the birds we're seeing are all have never made this migration and are not traveling with adult birds. So it's a wonderment. Okay. Yes, I'm sorry.
How will global warming affect migrations?
That's a very good question. Global warming has been affecting migration all along. There's certain birds that, for example, in Europe, uh, um, one of which is called a black cap, not blackpoll, but black cap. Typically, historically, always migrated out of Scandinavia to Southern Europe and to North Africa. But in recent decades, they are now overwintering in the United Kingdom, which that never happened before. So that's happening because it's warmer, things are warmer. The other thing that a negative impact could certainly be that uh, I love wildflowers. I do a lot with wildflowers, and these birds are dependent on the wildflowers and especially trees like oak trees and maples with their early blossoms and the pollen that they produce. And so the worry is that the plants are going to start blooming earlier and apparently are already blooming earlier, and that the migration that is part of the instinctual calendar on the birds, they're going to become out of phase with each other. In other words, when the birds are going to be migrating through our area, a lot of these flowering plants may have already start to go by then. So that is certainly one. A lot of places that birds would use, and a lot of animals would use for stopover places. Well, things are getting so hot in a lot of places that the microenvironment in that area is changing. So what might have been a nice semi-moist forest with lots of stuff is now drying out. So there are a lot of I think we're in trouble, okay? And for a lot of those reasons. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, why don't we close with what can we do to help migrating birds get the fuel they need for the journey?
Well, that's a really good question. If you go to the beach, okay, I love to go to the beach. I mean, uh, for bird watching thing like if you see a flock of birds on the beach, I really highly recommend it. Whenever I take a birding group out to see shorebirds or things like that, we'd always make we always our goal was to see them without making them fly. Because if they're trying to rest on the beach and make them fly, they're not resting. They're using up some of the fat reserve. So be really respectful of these animals and give them space and try not to make them fly. That's certainly one. You could during migration early spring, if you have a feeding station, that's a really good thing. Have water. And for things early spring migrants like grosbeaks and orioles and things like that, oranges are a really good thing. If you have a garden, that's your beautiful garden, I'm a big advocate. I like it in the wintertime. I like a garden that is still full of all the old weeds and all the old, nobody's ever cleaned it out because that garden with all the old plants and the seed pods provide lots of seed for sparrows and juncos and things like that that need this food. Okay, so a lot, if you have big windows that on right angles to each other in the house, if you just put something on it so birds don't know that's windows, they think it looks like a passageway through a forest in order so they don't run into anything. Um, One of the biggest thing you can do is don't let your cat go outside. Cats kill millions of birds every year. And you can imagine that if you're a wood warbler, one of these little migratory birds, and you're in Massachusetts, and this bird has flown in from Virginia and is really tired and needs to rest. Okay, it's not nearly as competent in avoiding a cat as it would be if it hadn't migrated, what, 300 or 400 miles. Those are just some of the things that you can do to. Another thing is buy shade-grown coffee. Well, why? Well, that helps the birds. We think of them as our birds, orioles and tanagers and grosbeaks and things like that. Well, if you buy shade-grown coffee, that's coffee that's underneath trees. Instead of clear cutting a place and then planting their coffee plants, really responsible, or leave the large trees overneath the grove of coffee trees. Shade-grown coffee, you pay a little premium for it. It's a good thing. But those big trees that are overhanging the coffee plants provide habitat for we think of as our birds that are overwintering in Costa Rica or Panama or something. So those are just some ideas.
Great, thank you for your ideas. So we are out of time, but Bill, I want to thank you for a fascinating presentation and sharing your beautiful photos. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Helen.